afternoon. Today we are continuing in Unit 2 with PO8. I can add and subtract rational numbers. So remember, those rational numbers are positives and negatives, fractions, and decimals that end or repeat. So we're going to work on adding and subtracting those. What catches people a lot of times is those negative numbers and how we add and subtract those negative numbers. So we're going to review that because on the test, you will not be able to use a calculator on the test for this objective. So we need to know how to use that number line. We need to really think through which way we're going on the number line when we're adding or subtracting. So when we add, the operation becomes addition, and the direction on the number line is you go to the right. So if we are at a 0 here, we know negative numbers go to the left, positive numbers go to the right. When we add, we always go to the right on the number line. An example would be 10 plus 14 equals 24. That's just an example of adding, going to the right on the number line. That's an easy one, right? We've been doing that for years. Now, we're going to add a negative. When we add a negative number, our operation becomes subtraction. And when we subtract, we go to the left on the number line. So that would be saying 10 plus negative 14.
Can I just say something really quick?
Yes.
At the end of the day, can you all pay, not all of you, but if you have thought maybe I've left a sweatshirt, sweater, lunchbox, whatever at school, maybe just hop down and look at the lost and found because there is overflowing already. And there's some stuff that's probably about your guys' size that's sitting in there waiting to be claimed again. Okay? Don't just take anything random, but do it.
Yeah. That reminds me, somebody left their jacket in here Friday afternoon. So if this cool jacket up front is yours, make sure you take it home today. Okay, so if we add a negative number, we're actually subtracting that number. So if it's 10 plus negative 14, we're going to go to the left on the number line. So 10 plus negative 14 is going to be a negative 4. Okay.
And then, what if you did like an addition where you did negative 1 plus 2? That would still be going to the right because the bigger number
Correct.
is getting added.
Correct. This is doing the negative. So if we add a negative, if we did what you said was negative 1 plus 2, that negative 1 just tells us where we're starting on the number line. And you're correct, we're adding a positive. So we're going to go to the right. So the first number just tells you where you start on the number line. And then we have to look at that operation with the positive or negative, what direction we go from there. Will.
So if we wanted to use a number line for these, and we needed like an extra sheet of paper, how would we like show you that we did it?
So on the test, if you need a number line, you could actually just write it on the test. Like here, I would start at 10, and then, I'm going to subtract 14, so I'm going to go to the left 14, and I'll just show that part on the test for showing my work. All right, so we've got 2 more boxes to fill in on this table. When you subtract, your operation is subtraction. And subtraction on the number line goes to the left. So if we have 10 minus 14, that gives me that negative 4. But now, like up here, we added a negative. If we subtract a negative, our operation turns to addition. So that negative number, adding or subtracting a negative, flips our operation. But that's only when it's the second number. Like Peyton said, if that negative is the first number, it just tells us where we start on the number line. If you add a negative, you flip to subtraction and go to the left. If you subtract a negative, you flip subtract to adding, so we go to the right. So if we have 10 minus, and a lot of times they'll put it like this with the parentheses around it, so we know that it's a negative 14. So yeah, because if we just did 10 minus negative 14, that gets kind of goofy looking when you subtract a negative. So they'll oftentimes will put parentheses around it, so you know it's a negative 14. So we're gonna flip that minus to an adding. So it becomes 24. So that minus a negative becomes adding a 14. Kaylin.
But would it, because when there's parentheses, doesn't that number go first?
So when we think of PERMDAS, we're looking at operations. So when we have parentheses around that negative 14, there's no operation in there, so we're not following PERMDAS. I love how you're thinking about parentheses and order of operations. But this is different because there's no operation happening in there. It's just telling us it's a negative number. Henry.
Also, I already learned this from Khan Academy because you signed this, so if people are having trouble with this, they can always.
Yeah. So the Khan Academy that I assigned, I knew this was coming up. So you could, so doing the Khan Academy might help with this, or doing this assignment might help with the Khan Academy. So our first and our our first and our third is we've done before. We know adding, you go to the right. We know subtracting, you go to the left. Those are things that we've already done. Now we're building on that, and we're throwing in adding a negative and subtracting a negative. So whenever you're doing it with a negative as your second number, you flip the operation. Just like when you multiply two negatives, it becomes a positive. Okay, those negative numbers, we just know that they flip things around on us. So we know that on the test, we are not going to be able to use a calculator, but on our homework, you're gonna do the math first, and then you can use the calculator to check your answer to make sure you're on the right track. You will not be able to do that on the test. But on our homework, we're going to use that calculator just to double check. Okay, so that's just for checking purposes. You need to understand how we get the answers first. This box up here is something that you would be able to put on, well, not this part. This part, not this. We can't put examples on help sheet, but all the rest we can put on our help sheet when it comes time for our test for Unit 2. So just know this is important, so you want to make sure to have that filled in. So let's look at our work for today. Let's do some together. So add or subtract. We're not going to use our calculator right now because we're just going to do some together. If I have negative 7 plus 9, where would I end up on my number line? Lucas?
You would be going to the right.
I would be going to the right. Where would I end?
You would end at positive 2.
Yes, positive 2. What if I have 13 minus negative 4? Jude?
17.
Yeah. The way I do it, just to help me remember, if I'm subtracting a negative, I know that they turn to adding a positive. So when you subtract a negative, it's the same as adding a positive. So I know it's 13 plus 4. What if I have negative 5 minus 3? Where do you think I'd end, Kyle?
-8.
-8. Because I started at -5 and subtracting means I go to the left 3 places. Trying to think if there's any other ones. James?
-5 minus -20.
Okay, so let's look at this one. -5 minus -20. So that -5 tells me what? Well,
So you're on -5 on the number line.
yeah, that's where I'm going to start on the number line. So that first number tells me where to start. And then if I subtract a negative, James, what does that mean to subtract a negative? We're gonna add the positive. So if I'm starting at -5 and I'm adding 20, where am I gonna end, Emerson? Yeah, I'm gonna end at positive 15. Do you have another question?
If they're both like negative or both positive, no, if they're both negative, don't they like cancel each other out?
Give me an example so I know what you mean.
Well, kind of like that. They're both negatives, and
For the one that we just did. So if you minus a negative, they both flip to the positive, adding a positive. Is that what you meant? Yes. At first I thought you were talking about if it's a negative and a negative, like the two numbers. But yes, if it's minus a negative, it turns into adding a positive. Matthew?
Is it if they're both negative, it turns positive for multiplication
Yes.
and division?
Yes. Henry?
But what about -25 plus -8?
Okay, so what do we do if we add a negative? What does our table tell us to do?
It turns into 6.
Remember, we're supposed to fill in on our paper what I put up here, because that's gonna answer your question, Heather. So if we add a negative, that adding turns to subtracting a positive. So we're gonna subtract 8. Adding a -8 is the same as subtracting 8. So if we start at -25 and we're subtracting 8, where do we end at, Addie?
-17.
If we start at -25
oh,
and we're subtracting, we go to the left.
oh,
Yeah.
-33. Does that make sense, Addie? So if we have to flip the adding a negative to subtracting a positive, subtracting means we're going to the left on the number line. So it's different than what we're used to doing. So keep in mind, adding and subtracting negative numbers changes things up, and you have to slow your roll and make sure you know what you're doing. That's why everybody should have that chart filled in, so we can refer back to that chart at the top of the page. So then we have a second page. So let's look at our second page. Decimals, because they are rational numbers, right? These decimals end, they are rational numbers. So again, on the test, we will not be using our calculator, but we can use the calculator to check our answer. What big important thing do we need to remember when we're adding or subtracting decimals, Adeza?
Line up the decimals.
Line up your decimal places. Stack the decimals on top. And if you have an empty place value, what do we do with that, Madden?
Add a 0 there.
Fill it in with the 0. So if we have 7.1 plus 12.6, I'm going to line up my decimals. I'm adding, so 1 plus 6 is 7, 7 plus 2 is 9, 1 plus nothing is 1. I bring that decimal place straight down. Will.
Let me show you work on that one.
Yes, you have to show your work because calculators are not allowed on the test. So you have to show your work and then you can use the calculator to check it. But I do need to see your work because I will want to see your work on the test. Do we get gold stars for doing mental math on a test? No. So don't do it because we make simple mistakes when we do mental math on tests. When we look at this and say, okay, let me try to do 7 plus 1 plus 7.1 plus 12.6, I'm going to do it in my head. That's when I make mistakes. So get in the habit of showing your work with this kind of math. Don't try to do mental math with it. Now let's go down to fractions. You're going to finish that later. Pay attention to the fractions part. If you have a mixed number, first you have to convert it to improper. So always convert to that improper fraction, then do the adding or subtracting. We have to use equivalent fractions when we add or subtract. What does that mean, Addie?
They have to have the same denominator.
Common denominators. Remember, whatever we do to the denominator, whatever we're multiplying by or dividing by, we have to do the same thing to the numerator. So if you have to multiply that denominator by 2, you have to multiply the numerator by 2. Then we can add or subtract the numerator. Denominator stays the same. So remember, denominators have to be the same to add or subtract, and that denominator stays the same. So we only, double caution, add or subtract the numerators only, and then take note. Write your answer in simplest form. So if it's improper, make it proper. If we can divide something out of both the numerator and denominator, do it.
Hello, Royals. These are your Monday
So
afternoon
with that, I'm
announcements.
gonna have you
The only thing I
finish your
have
assignment.
is 4 kiddos to come down to the office to grab something.
If you are listening at home, I hope you're well and hope to see you soon.
Joanna
Have a wonderful day.